and rose to the top ranks of one of the hardest special services in the world. Like, so he had to fight the immigration journey, and then, did that on top of it. It's, it's funny how a lot of these people have adversity in common. It's almost like it should be a tool that you use
Right.
instead of an excuse. And I think the right people have the right mindset about this trial and tribulation and how they can use that to not only better themselves, but when you get older and you have that perspective of your struggle and you go through, as they say sometimes in the military, the suck, you don't panic. You've been through it and you build these calluses that help you persevere through no matter what, because anybody and everybody has some sort of struggle. And I can sit here and talk about my immigration struggle. Well, imagine a single mother out there, working 2 or 3 jobs with kids at home and trying to go to school. Is my circumstance better or worse than theirs?
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Fire Forged Leader podcast. I'm Steve Baumgartner, your host, as always, and we have a special guest today on by the name of Vincent Wanga, and I think I pronounced that correctly.
You did. I appreciate that. It's great to be on the show, Steve, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here, man. So, typical guest of the Fire Forged Leader podcast, we generally talk to a lot of people in manufacturing and talk to people that are, military and different things like that. You come from a little bit of a different space, which we'll get into in a little bit. But really, I'd like to just kind of mention that you come from the creative space. So I'm going to ask you a little bit different question right out of the gate. And that's not what do you do? What job do you work in? Where did you come from? But who is Vincent Wanga?
Who am I? That should be an easy question, right? But I'm a lot of different people from a lot of different influence. So who I am is an African immigrant from Kenya. Who I am is the proud son of 2 PhD parents. Who I am is very recently, as of last year, a proud American. Who I am is a creative, yes, but somebody who I think has a lot of tangential interests and talents that have spread very fast and vastly beyond just the creative lexicon. I'm an entrepreneur. I've owned businesses. I've succeeded immensely. I've failed terribly. I'm all those things, and all those things really make up the unique character that I am today. And I'm proud of every, positive thing that's happened in my life and every negative, embarrassing thing that's happened in my life. And I'm open and honest about those things to kind of share those experiences with people. And that's kind of the mission I'm on lately. So who I am has evolved, but that's what made me.
So when did you actually come over to the United States?
I was 3 years old.
3 years old?
3 years old when I came to the United States. So just old enough to have a weird accent and not fit in, but not old enough that I can assimilate and want to be an American and figure things out and go up through the American school system. But the funny thing about that duality is when I went home to an African household. So, in my day life, I was an American, but at home, I was African. So just navigating those two cultural differences throughout my life was just so interesting. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but looking back, it was a really rewarding experience to kind of live in two cultures in one country.
Absolutely. Did your parents learn the language or did they?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Kenya is it's a British ex-colony. So English is the official language there. They spoke, fluent English. Swahili is kind of the African bridge language for the entire region. Yeah, we spoke English fluently, but we also had our Swahili and tribal language that they spoke at home when they're talking to family and friends. So it was an interesting dynamic where, they were kind of going through the same struggle, but as adults.
Right. No, that's really cool. I absolutely love that kind of diversity. I get to work with a lot of different people in my career, a lot of different countries, Burmese, Vietnamese, different Hispanic origins, different things like that. And I always get so amazed with just the language in particular, right? I barely know English.
That's fair.
And then you have all these people who can speak 2, 3, 4, 7 different languages. I knew a lady here a couple of years ago, I used to do a lot of work in the reliability spectrum, and she knew 14 different languages. Where do you fit that in?
I don't know how that works. My girlfriend speaks 4 languages fluently. And, again,
Wow.
I'm more on your end of the spectrum. I'm still struggling with English and Swahili and French and Spanish. I speak about at a third grade level in some of those languages, which is just enough to be ignorant overseas and not embarrass yourself. So I kind of approach language from a practical standpoint, but these people who have it mastered and are fluent and grow up with this duality at home and into their adult lives, I have a lot of respect for, because it's people, I think, don't always understand it's not just a language switch. It's a culture shift when you change your language.
Right.
So it's an impressive pursuit. I definitely won't be coaching anybody on anytime soon.
Congratulations as well. I think what you said was last year you became a United States citizen, correct?
That's correct. I think an interesting thing about the immigrant journey is we're some of the most patriotic people you'll ever meet, because of what often, especially when you're young like me, your parents sacrificed to come to this country, but also this combination of like this immigrant ambition to make something of yourself in this new foreign land and the opportunities that a country like America offers for us. So it was an incredible honor. Even though I grew up in this country, I've been a permanent resident for most of my life. Just taking that final step to become an American citizen and finally have like this piece of paper that validates how I feel was incredibly powerful and enriching for me, and was one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah, so this is going to go a little bit off topic, so I apologize for this, but I'm really curious about your experience through that process, and I understand that, there's two different sides of the spectrum. I'm not going to go into politics at all, but the current immigration versus, immigration as it has been in the last coming years, I believe it should be somewhere in the middle of those two. But the process for you to become a United States citizen, do you think it was that difficult or?
Yes, it was, but in a different and unique way. I think what was difficult is the beginning. Coming over, my parents got student visas, they're getting their PhDs at the University of Minnesota. So that helped, but our paperwork got lost several times. We had to start over. For pretty much the first 10 years of my life, we were starting over at exorbitant costs every 5 years at the end of the line. So all that equity we built up by going to school here and having jobs here and paying taxes and being legal, like none of that helped in the beginning. But once we reached adolescence and we got a permanent residency, like things kind of settled in and, we were able to move forward. But for anybody, who goes through the legal immigration process, it's a very difficult, tedious, expensive process. And I emphasize that because when you finally get it, you will never take it for granted again because of that journey. So I saw my parents struggle through that. And while they're being poor students, trying to raise 4 kids and having to deal with immigration status, having to pay the government to work was difficult for me as a young kid trying to get, an entry level job in retail. But these are all part of the process that, a lot of immigrants, millions of people go through every year, not just in this country, in other countries as well. But it really makes you appreciate the journey. And that final moment when you get over the hump is incredibly rewarding. But I'm also going to say another thing that's interesting. Think of everything I went through to finally get my, citizenship when I'm almost 40 years old. And I'll be in a taxi with a person who barely speaks English who got it in 2 years. So the immigration system is not equitable, and that can be frustrating, but that's the reality sometimes. And, you try not to compare your situation and status with other people, and you just appreciate what you need to do to get through that journey. But, when you start talking to other people and they did go through something like you, or they didn't go through something like you, or they went through something worse, you just realize the variance of the immigration process here. And I agree with you. I wish there was a common ground and a standard process. It's a variable that we all have to deal with.
Right. And, just coming from an uneducated seat, I hear some people who have gotten their citizenship and they're, asking the crazy questions on the test, like what was the 13th president, capitals of places I don't even know, right? And I've been an American citizen my entire life, and I'm in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I want to make sure that the people coming over are safe. I want them to contribute, and that's really about it. I would think that we could slim and trim up this process quite a bit. But at the same time, when I was hearing you speak about it, it made me understand that the process, even if it's overburdened, is important because of the outcome from it.
Absolutely. And I believe the nomenclature for your thing is the fire force leader. It's that fire that builds this character in you, that when you finally get over the hump, that journey is what makes you who you are. And my point in that is, although it was difficult, although it wasn't linear, it has this profound feeling when you finally get over the hump that you don't take it for granted. But more importantly, the right people who can persist and persevere through that purpose are the type of people you want in your country. If it was easy and just anybody could come over and just have this, one of the greatest privileges in the world of being an American citizen, I think you'd see less quality people coming over. So not only did we want it that bad, but we felt we were worthy of that honor, and we're bringing, value to this country, and got value in return. So I never take that for granted. And I'm in a weird way, with perspective, grateful for everything my family went through, because again, that is something that we'll never take for granted, that we finally got through and became something that when we started our journey in this country, it didn't seem realistic. And that's what I take out of that experience.
That's awesome. I love hearing that, because it really solidifies a lot of things in my brain about the process. Now, I also think this is an excellent segue, because I've been working on a book for quite a while, and it is one of the most excruciating processes that I've ever dove into. But you just released one recently called The Art of Direction.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that book.
Before I even get into that, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's the exact same anecdote where you look at writing a book and people say that and you just think it's an exercise. It is incredibly hard. I've done incredibly hard things in my life. I've started businesses from scratch, but writing a book is not only super cathartic, but it's such a painful journey. First of all, getting through the exercise of just getting it started and getting it written, and then it gets critiqued by everyone and anyone, and you trying to hold on to your story and your soul while everyone has input on what it should be. And then when you get through that process, then the public and the world has an opinion on it, and you have this self-doubt on, was it enough? Is it good enough? All these things. So again, that process, going through that fire, is what makes that experience so rewarding. And it applies to immigration, it applies to the book, it applies to our careers, to parenthood, everything, the new perspective on things. But I did get through that journey. I wrote this book called The Art of Direction, Personal Perspectives on the Path to Creative Leadership. And what I always like to tell people is, I don't want to write a book like AI could create. We're just in that age where you can get any of this superficial information from anything, or a blog post. I really wanted to interject my personal story. And the reason I'm so open about my immigration experience with you, I talk about that in my book. It's about my personal journey in life and how that led me to the highest levels of creative leadership, both in tech and in advertising and in so many industries I've worked for. But more important than me and what I did and how I got here and bragging about that, it's like, here's the cheat codes. Here's every mistake I made on that journey. Here's all the things that I learned. I want you to have a shortcut to that process so that you can get to leadership or an ideal outcome in your career much easier than the path I had to take. The second thing I want people to take out of this book is, I just talked about, some of the struggles that I've had in my life. There's no excuses. Whether you're an immigrant or you're a woman or you're white or you're black or whatever your circumstances, you're rich or you're poor, how many people have found success despite those circumstances? Don't ever use that as a self-limiting crutch. Instead, I use it as motivation and fuel to be the greatest person that I can. And I'm deeply honest about my struggles and my failures to show people that not only will you encounter them, but you can overcome them, and they will make you better in the end. More important than what is a creative director and some of the things that I talk about is just this journey, my personal story, how I got here, and helping people get to an ideal outcome in their careers and their lives, knowing that they're going to face trials and tribulations that are going to shape them for the better. So that was my motivation.
I love that. No excuses. Absolutely no excuses, right? That resonated with me real hard. I mean, we live in a society today that you can find an excuse for everything. You brought up race, you brought up gender. I mean, people are using those right and left. I can't get ahead because I'm white, or I'm female, or I'm black, or whatever the case is. And I love that no excuses mantra. I would say that every guest that I've had on this show, whether they were special forces, Navy SEAL, an author. I had Drew Dudley, who, TED Talk, a top 10 guy. Everybody came from adversity. That's one thing that we all have in common. And if we could use that to fuel our fire, if we could use that to unite with other people rather than using it for a division, world would be a totally different place. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, and I don't just say it, I lived it. And you just mentioned all these incredibly heroic and important people. I saw the Navy SEAL interview that you did recently, and he was an immigrant and rose to the top ranks of one of the hardest special services in the world. So he had to fight the immigration journey and then, did that on top of it. It's funny how a lot of these people have adversity in common. It's almost like it should be a tool that you use and instead of an excuse. And I think the right people have the right mindset about this trial and tribulation and how they can use that to not only better themselves when you get older and you have that perspective of your struggle and you go through, as they say sometimes in the military, the suck. You don't panic, you've been through it and you build these calluses that help you persevere through no matter what, because anybody and everybody has some sort of struggle. And I can sit here and talk about my immigration struggle. Well, imagine a single mother out there, working 2 or 3 jobs with kids at home and trying to go to school. Is my circumstance better or worse than theirs? Everybody has something. So rather than complain about it, I use it as fuel. And I'm telling people from my personal experiences, I wouldn't be where I am without that struggle. And it's a really weird psychology, but it's true.
It's interesting. I've been up on the stage giving talks and I talk about my rough past and everything else. People are always like, yeah, well, I didn't have those kind of things in my life. So, there's no way that I could do X, Y, Z. Right. And I'm like, are you listening to yourself right now? Everybody's struggle is personal to them. There's no levels to it. It's what you use as fuel. It's not, how deep you went or how dark you went. It's about what you're going to do with every experience in your life. How can you build upon that?
Absolutely.
So go ahead.
I 100% agree, but I also think everyone has privilege too. And we have to be aware of both of our struggles, but also how we're privileged in our life. I mentioned growing up as an immigrant, but I spoke fluent English. I had a privilege right there. I got 2 PhD parents who taught me, I can do anything and were an example of the highest levels of success. They give me a mindset as a gift that a lot of people didn't have. I had built-in role models with my brothers and sisters. So, we also have to recognize our privilege and balance that out with our struggles. And again, not make excuses, but use those assets. They're both assets to push ourselves forward to our ideal outcome.
Agreed. Just an example of that in my life is, I went from horribly drug addicted parents. And when I got adopted, I went into a very strong marriage, faith-filled home. It was the perfect model after having a tremendously bad one to start off with. And, a lot of people would, well, you lost your parents. Yeah, I did. But I gained some phenomenal people in my life who became my parents over time and taught me a lot of things about having a marriage. We're getting ready to celebrate our 20th, so I would have never had that if I wouldn't have gone through that struggle. So that's a different way of looking at privilege. And I really appreciate it. That's amazing. So since we got into the book and we talked about your career, or we haven't talked about your career too much, since we generally talk about manufacturing and military and places where leadership is, I would say, common. I got to say, when your person reached out to me about getting on the show, I was thinking, this is an odd space for leadership to develop, and it was judgment, not going to hold that back. But in the creative space, a lot of times we think of people who are, artsy or, this, that, and the other, and don't really think about leadership in that realm too much. It has to be there, of course. Otherwise, nothing would get done, right? But we just don't think about it. How does that look in the creative world? I guess leadership as a whole.
Yeah, and those are fair anecdotes, but what creatives also are is fiercely independent. Some people have described it like herding cats, so leadership is essential, especially with creatives, because we don't naturally collaborate. The only creatives I know who can just collaborate naturally are musicians. Everybody else, like, try to get 2 artists to paint a mural together or 2 comedians to do a set together. Like, we're just independent people who like to create on our own. So when you apply it to a business context, getting them all to roll in the same direction in order to have an outcome is incredibly hard. And they've tried so many different ways to do that. But let's get a business leader down here to herd them up and get them organized. They don't identify with you. You don't understand them. Let's get a marketing person who's close and adjacent to lead them. They don't understand creative and the output. It doesn't work. The way to do it is to get somebody who grew up in the creative culture, but also understands the business side, the marketing, the business objectives, the KPIs, everything that the business needs to grow. That is a duality between the business and the creative team to actually help lead them to outcomes that helps the bottom line. And that's where people like me come in, the creative director, the art director. And the reason, you were kind of snickering when, this came up is because nobody knows we exist. Nobody knows what we do. Even the creatives don't know what we do. There's all this ambiguity about this essential leadership role that is behind some of the biggest brands in the world. And that was another motivation for the book, is to add clarity. Here's what we do. Here's the value we add. Here's why it's important. But also, we need another generation of leaders. We're in strange times where AI is taking people's jobs and creativity is being devalued and businesses are trying to differentiate themselves and stand out. And we have global competition. Like, who's going to lead that next generation? And I wanted to inspire the next generation of leadership with, first, clarity, but two, here's why that role is important. And I sit at this essential conduit between the teams who create all these brand and marketing from your website to all those things, and the business leaders who need those things to convert into currency and cash and profit. And that is something that is really interesting about my unique perspective on leadership, is I have that duality. But I also think there are lessons that people can learn from my experience as a creative leader that they could apply to their non-creative practice, just like I've learned a lot of lessons on leadership from people in the military, from people who have to deal with global logistics. I mean, that's easy compared to my job. So I take lessons from other industries and apply it to my craft. And I think people can learn from my craft and apply it to theirs too.
I agree. Now, in leadership, there's a lot of things that transcend, just like what you were talking about. But you also talked about how with creatives, you really need someone from that space. So when I think about that, and I also connect it to what you were talking about as far as nobody knows that you exist inside or outside of the realm, how did you learn how to be a good leader within that?
That's a great question. And I think that brings up one of the most important things that I advocate for, and that's mentorship. I got kicked out of school after being a prodigy, basically, in art and design for most of my young adolescence. I knew what I wanted to be since I was a little kid. Went to school, long story short, it was expensive, ran out of money. My career was over before it even started. I randomly, while lost and trying to find myself in East Texas, where my family had relocated, entered a building that said creative on it and asked them, hey, you guys hiring? They said no. So I left my resume and my fledgling portfolio, and they got back to me a few days later and said, let's have an informational interview. I met with their CEO. I don't know what he saw in me, but he gave me this second chance. I told you about my immigrant story and how that trial and tribulation makes you take everything and hold it dearly. And he gave me this opportunity to restart my career after I had already failed before it even started, and basically made me an offer to be an intern. And I started. And the two art director and creative director who worked there, I didn't even know what that meant, were the most amazing human beings in my entire career. They treated me as an equal. They taught me everything they know. They led with empathy instead of arrogance. And they were open and honest about how things work, and raised me up in this career in a way that not only was I successful because of everything I learned from them, it inspired me to become them later. So that mentorship, that privilege I had of just having these two people in my life in East Texas who helped create the leader that I am by example, really inspired me to have that journey. And I think having that vision of wanting to be a leader is not something that's always natural to people. I'm a lone wolf. I just want to do my work like most creatives. But there's something about leadership and your ability to mentor people and nurture people and affect their careers in a positive way or a negative way if you're a bad leader. That is such a powerful responsibility. And not to make too long of a story, throughout my career journey, I went into entrepreneurship, where I would start a company, and it starts as an individual and then it grows, and now you have employees, and now their livelihoods, their mortgages, their rent, all that's on your head. What an incredible burden to bear. So you really got to school up on how to be a good leader, and having that example that was set for me early inspired me to continue to do my homework and learn from other industries and other leaders to make sure that their faith in me is not misplaced. And as I continue to grow in corporate America or entrepreneurship or tech or startups, I continue to learn and make sure that anybody entrusting my leadership and their livelihoods understood that I know what I'm doing, that I'm learning, but that I'm empathetic and I'm understanding and I'm decisive, and I will protect not just the investment of the company, but also their emotional investment in me and their livelihoods. So leadership seems ethereal till you put it in that context.
Yeah, that's interesting about the mentorship. And there was two different ones you mentioned. So what would be some of the largest takeaways that you had from those two people?
From those two people, one is emotional intelligence. I think this is something undervalued. I know you've spoken about it before. Understanding people and the unique makeup of people and having an empathetic approach to people is such an underserved skill. I think so many people are obsessed with the hard metrics and hard skills of leadership. They forget the emotional tools that you need, especially when you're dealing with creatives. Their circumstances are different. Their disciplines are different. Their backgrounds are different. You have to have this nuanced approach where you're empathetic about how you lead them and understand how that affects their career. They understood I'm a nobody with a lot of raw talent, but didn't know a single software or any of these professional things that they had. So they had patience, and they would give me assignments that would slowly bring me up to their level and allowed me with patience to make mistakes, and then would correct me in an empathetic and understanding way where I didn't lose my confidence, but it grew my confidence, and I was able to come up very quickly and actually be an asset to that team. That was one of the biggest takeaways. The other thing is just incredible attention to detail. What I learned from them is this vision where every little minute detail needs to be accounted for and taken care of. And I don't care what your discipline of leadership is, that is one of your most important and essential skills. You see the details that others don't. You catch the things that they don't. But also there's mutual accountability where you might catch a mistake, but as a leader, that's also your mistake. And they took a lot of that heat from me. And it just taught me so many profound lessons in a passive way that I've continued to incorporate, not just in my own leadership journey, but also in the things that I share with other people. It's also borrowed knowledge from that experience.
I like that. I had a lot of the same sorts of things in my career, but the first thing that you mentioned is very powerful, right? And that's, if I was going to sum it up, what I heard from you was that they trusted you more than you trusted yourself at that moment.
Absolutely.
And that goes a long way. You know, I had a mentor at one time who basically told me, I'm going to hack this up, but Steve, I believe that you're going to be able to do this and you're going to have to prove me wrong. And that was one of the most powerful things in the world. I didn't know I could do it at that moment, but he knew I could do it. And that was huge. So you also mentioned you did a lot of looking outside of the creative space to leverage other industries and other leaders. Can you tell us about a couple of those?
Sure. So not to get too personal, but there's this parallel lives that were going on. I'm a twin. My late twin brother was a Marine Corps warrant officer, third class. So while I was off on my creative journey, entering the creative industry, he joined the Marines. And I didn't know how I felt about that. He was very kind of lost at that time, getting into trouble and didn't really take school seriously. And we didn't know what to do with him. And one of his buddies joined the Marines. So he's like, hey, I'll join the Marines. And I remember my family was upset. They're like, you could go to war. Like, this is serious. You should take this seriously. You don't just make a decision like that passively. Long story short, it transformed his life. Not only did he join this international brotherhood and sisterhood that is so powerful that I continue to benefit from to this day, but he served our country twice in war, and unfortunately he's passed. But my point here is that he was on this journey within the military, which has a very unique leadership structure. And I was on this journey in the creative process. And it was funny the things that I learned from him as he was on his journey. Things like the sheer efficiency of logistics that happen in the military to get all this equipment and human energy any point in the globe within days. Think about the attention to detail that requires. So while he's sharing these anecdotes about what his leaders are doing, what their procedures are, how everything is so organized and tightened, because a mistake here can cost lives. I applied a lot of those lessons to my journey when I'm leading a team of 100 for like a commercial production, which includes a lot of people and logistics, and making sure everyone is doing their part, but also trusting each person to do their job. And it's a very delicate pendulum that, for example, military does very, very well, but because they built you up that way. And then they let you do your job. And if you don't, you're held accountable. So there's just so many alternate parallels that I learned just through his experience as one example that I was able to apply to my craft that obviously has a lot less consequence, but just as much impact.
Absolutely. The consequences definitely smaller, but you mentioned it before too. There's people with their mortgages and putting food on the table and,
Right.
lifestyles that they need to maintain. So there's plenty of consequence there for sure, even with 100 people.
Absolutely.
So you also talked about your entrepreneurial journey. What does that look like?
Yeah, so, I was growing up in my agency journey and rising up the ranks, and I was at an agency in Minneapolis, this hometown where I grew up, and something just hit me. This lone wolf urge. I felt I could do this on my own. So I made the very bright decision of leaving my agency during the recession and starting my own independent consultancy. Oh my gosh, was that hard. For the first time, I realized the limitation of my skills. It's not just that you can be an incredible person at your craft and you just go start a business. I learned the hard way, like business is a whole nother deal. It's a whole nother language. You got to know how to run a business. You got to know about profit and loss. You got to know about margins. You got to know about taxes. You got to be a debt collector. You got to be all these things. And when you're an independent proprietor, you are all those things. So I went from one job to 8 jobs, but it was an incredibly rewarding experience because I started out just failing and failing and failing. And how do I get clients and all these things? And I learned something along the journey that I don't know if it applies to all entrepreneurs, but it was true to me. When I stopped worrying about the money, when I stopped worrying about where my next check is going to come from, when I just became obsessive about doing the best possible quality job for my clients and my customers, everything else took care of itself. They started referring other people to me. And within 3 years, I was making twice as much money as I was at my agency. And I had the freedom to travel the world and do whatever I wanted. But I also got a really good crash course on the business side of owning a business, being an entrepreneur, and all of that requirements that I was so naive to before. And that led me to an opportunity to go start an agency of my own with a business partner in Washington, D.C. And that's where that point I made earlier about, well, now you're not independent. Now you are leading this company with your partner, but everybody's checks are dependent on you. For the first year, we barely paid ourselves so we could make payroll and pay rent. The sacrifice that your leaders sometimes go through for you to have a normal day is a whole book in itself that I'm sure any entrepreneur can write. So I learned about the sacrifice of leadership and what that entails when people's livelihoods are dependent on you going out and closing that deal and bringing that money in, and they get paid first, you get paid last. So these were incredibly rewarding and enriching experiences that a lot of people, don't get to experience because they grew up within the safety of a corporate structure, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I encourage everyone to at least go on one entrepreneurial journey in their life so they can have these experiences that are incredibly invaluable and give you the type of skills and breadth of skills that can almost allow you to do anything later in life. So that was a really powerful era for me.
That's awesome. I love how you said serve the customer first. You didn't come out straight out and say that, but anytime that you worry about service first, everything else will take care of itself.
I've lived it. I believe it to my core, and I would challenge anyone to prove me wrong.
Yeah, agreed. Where do you live now, Vincent?
Well, I have a bit of a duality. So I live in Washington, D.C. most of the time. That's where I've resided for about the last 9 or 10 years. But I also have a property in Asheville, North Carolina, where I get peace and serenity and can hike and chop wood and be another authentic version of myself.
Nice. Asheville, that's right down at the bottom of the mountains, right?
We're in the mountains. We're right in between the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Great Smoky Mountains. So right there close to the border with Tennessee, definitely in the mountains.
Nice. I can't, I've been to Washington, D.C. plenty, but I can't think of anywhere nice. Sorry.
It's a town of many things, and every 4 years, you think you have it figured out and it changes. So that's the nature of the city.
Yeah, way too much politics in Washington, D.C. for this guy. But I think we as a nation need to give up on quite a bit of that, and I can't be any closer to it than what I am today. I cut the cord on TV about 5 years ago, and it was the most freeing thing in the world because the politics went out the window and I started worrying about people.
That's a profound statement. I think we could all learn something from that. I'm trying to get there. That's what Asheville is for me. My TV is a fireplace and a nice bourbon and relaxation and peace and nature.
So I did hear you state that you grew up in Minnesota, though, Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. Minneapolis and St. Paul. We call it the Twin Cities. They're right next door to each other.
Yeah, my parents actually live in Alexandria, which is just a little ways west of there. But my father's also a University of Minnesota alum. So
there you go.
A little bit in in common with your parents. Did they finish out their PhDs up there?
They did. They did. I think my mom actually got her PhD in Edmonton. They went to Canada first, and then my father finished his PhD at the University of Minnesota. So they both went to school for about half of my adolescence. So imagine going to school, post-secondary education for a decade. That's an incredible sacrifice, but it worked out in the end for them.
But they also showed you a tremendous amount of work ethic throughout that, being immigrants, going to school, and I would imagine they were working as well and raising you and your brother.
That's right. 2 professional jobs while going to school. Work ethic is an understatement. And again, to anyone who's listening, they already had their master's degrees in Kenya. So if they're going to school again to adapt to the American system, that's an incredible amount of humility and work ethic and grit for them to do that. But again, I was watching. I saw that. So imagine your parents go through that sacrifice and you decide to do nothing with your life. Like I have a debt and a burden to their sacrifice to do something great. And hopefully set the example for my children and or anyone who's watching me. So I that's part of my privilege.
I love that. You can't replace good parenthood. I mean, it's amazing. It's a tremendous privilege, as you stated. So yeah, I just wanted to circle back to that because I'm amazed by, the work ethic that you have, as a person. It shines through with, your journey from writing the book. Well, through the creative space, owning your own companies, writing the book, everything that you've done, screams work ethic, and you could have stopped at any point and said, well, I didn't make it through college. I, need to go work at a Kmart or whatever the case may be, go into retail or stay there. But you took that leap, you went and put your resume in and got that chance and worked through it and kept on working. So it shines through on you, but so many people lack that example going through life. And I just want to reiterate what you said. It is a privilege to have that in your life. And we need to be the example for other people as well, when we're in leadership.
I agree. And for me, I think sometimes people face barriers in their life, and because they don't quite know how to deal with that, they just give up, not understanding that everybody faces barriers in their life. For me, like when a door closes, I'll kick it in. I will find the back door. I'm relentless in my pursuit of proving myself. And once I have that opportunity, making sure that wasn't a mistake. So I think one is understanding how to get in the door and being relentless about that. But also when you get that opportunity, the job's not done. It's just starting. Now you got to earn it. So I never have like this imposter syndrome. It's like I always believe either I don't belong there or I do. It doesn't matter. I'm going to get in that room and I'm going to make the most of this experience. And if I feel inadequate, I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to outstudy you. I'm going to outwork you. I'm going to outdo everything I can to make sure that not just for myself or my pride, but that I am advocating for the people that I'm leading. And I think not enough people talk about the burden of leadership, and that I truly believe it's a selfless calling, but also it's a sacrifice. It's not a gift. It's something that people are choosing to do, and they sacrifice themselves for their team. And sometimes that means being the sacrificial lamb. Sometimes that means dishing out accountability. It is this nuanced duality that you constantly have to balance and adjust. And just when you have everything figured out, the whole world changes. Now there's AI and there's, all these new rules and regulations and things that you have to do. So it's a constant practice of keeping up and learning. Urge people, as we've talked about earlier, learn from outside your industry. Don't be in an echo chamber. I'm not just reading books from, other creative directors. I'm reading books on famous architects or famous military leaders. I'm reading history books about people who might have built great empires like the Rockefellers. That might apply to today's business lexicon. So open your mindset to other successful leaders in other industries. Take those lessons and apply them to your practice, and you'll have a much more well-rounded opportunity for success.
Absolutely. Well, Vincent, is there anything else that you'd like to cover that we didn't? We kind of took this down quite a few different paths, got to know you real well.
I would love not to flip the interview around, but learn a little bit more about your journey, especially your entrepreneurial journey. I know you're a small business owner, but hopefully you've resonated with some of my struggles. I'd love to hear about your journey and kind of what you learned on that front. I might learn something.
Yeah, so actually mine is, I would say that it's more of a starter journey than anything.
Uh-huh.
So currently I do men's leadership coaching. I focus on men because even though I've been married for 20 years, I still don't understand women. So that might be something that you can relate with. But I have a belief that men are specifically designed to lead. And that comes through my faith and a lot of different things that I've read and felt. I think we're just designed to lead. So, it's a servant leadership, like what you were talking about, but in fatherhood, in marriage, out in the community, in the workplace, all those sorts of things. So generally what I do is I bring cohorts of men through a hybrid coaching course and help them master self, master service, and then master legacy. Some of the things that you really resonated with me when you're talking about is all of the different things that you have to be. I think you said that you had to do 8 different jobs. I absolutely detest social media.
We have that in common.
Detest it. But that's where my clients come from.
Sure.
So I had to open up a new portion of myself that I got to get in front of camera. I like doing this. This to me is very natural. I like having conversations. Getting in front of a camera by myself, I've never enjoyed that. But sharing my wisdom, sharing the things that I've learned, absolutely love doing that. I'd just rather do it on a one-on-one setting. Doing the whole hook in the creative spaces is not my world, right? Having to do the books, the accounting, the business end of things. I do that at work, but it's because I get paid to do that at work. The money's not made in the accounting in a small business. I guess it is, but it doesn't feel like it. It's interacting with your customer base. It's giving them value. It's serving them, things like that. I also resonated when you were talking about serving your clients and the money will come. So I tried to, fight the natural instinct that I had on the services that I was providing. But once that I gave it up and, once again, faith-based, and I'm like, Lord, I accept it today, right? I'd pretty much given up until I had done that. And that helped me serve a certain clientele at a higher level. Been nothing but rock solid since. So those are a couple of the things that I've learned along the way, but it's damn hard.
That part. And I think too many people just hear the success stories and don't realize, the grit and grind that it takes to even get to that point. There's no headline when you're struggling and, you have negative, income. It's always when you become a success story and it's painted as if it happened overnight. I've never started a business that was successful and profitable within 2 years. There's a grind, there's a process here, and you have to be patient. But what I loved about what you said was 2 things. One, about the clients. I built successful businesses that were 100% referral based, zero marketing, just based off of serving each client the best I can, and they have a good experience and they refer somebody else. The other part that I really resonated when you're talking about your audience of men and why you chose them. I think the other part of being a man that I've experienced is this burden of leadership. Whether you want it or not, you might have a kid and a family now, and now there's this automatic burden that you got to figure it out. You got to bring in the money and stability, and whether that's, up with the times or not, that burden still exists. And there's not always this template where you can go to your father and say, hey, how do I do this? They might not be around. They may never have been around. You might not have that privilege, or they might not be the ideal leader for your circumstance. So the fact that you're focusing on leadership outside of just this corporate lexicon, but understanding that if you have a family, you're a leader. There's so many other versions of leadership that you can learn traits from that will help you in every pursuit. And I think particularly for men, it becomes this burden that we have to figure out the hard way. And we don't share enough information with each other on how we figured it out or how we did it best, or more importantly, how we failed in that journey so that we can learn from each other. And I love your small business is kind of filling that gap one client at a time, because we do gatekeep. Sometimes just out of our pride, sometimes just out of insecurity, but we need to talk more to each other about things that made us great leaders or will make us great leaders.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because I've kind of been measuring the success of what I'm doing off from how much hate I receive, which is weird. But I want to talk about, mentioned it might not be up with the times, but I came to this conclusion here the other day that, I'm not fitting in with the times today. I get it. It's feminism's on the rise. We have multiple different genders, all of these things, right? Agree, disagree. It's up to the individual. I know where my stance is, but I know that men need to lead, just like what you were saying. And that's all I know. And it doesn't take away from a woman. It doesn't take away anything from a woman for a man to lead. It takes away 0 things, right? My wife, she told me here about, I want to say it was probably 10 years ago. She's like, Steve, and this is once again faith-based, but she came up to me and she said, Steve, you are the leader of this family and you better start acting like it. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? So I started on this journey myself at that point in time. But what I want to say about the times is really that today is tomorrow's history, right? And history is not always the truth, or that's not a good way to say it. History is not always the way we should be doing things. So for men to be a cowering sheep and just do whatever everybody says, I don't think that that's the right side of history, if that makes sense.
I think every household is unique. And again, sometimes that burden is placed on us, whether you want it or not. So you should at least have the skills to be a leader if you can. There's households where a woman is a leader. There are businesses where I've been led by a woman and who was amazing and fantastic, incredible. So I think it's circumstantial. But the point that resonated to me from you is understanding how to be men and how to lead from a male perspective is important. Just like I wouldn't tell a woman how to be a woman. And I think hearing it from somebody who shares your lived experience and that burden is so important and powerful. And I think so many of us are hiding the fact that we don't have that resource all the time. You can't just go to your boss and ask them how to be a man. There's a personal element there, a brotherhood that I think are lacking in a lot of people's lives. And there's got to be alternative places where we can get that you're obviously solving for. But I really appreciate just from, a man who grew up with, a great father, was a leader in our household. But that's one perspective. When you share as a group your experiences, it's such much more powerful anecdote where we can learn and evolve with the times, but not lose our humanity and our masculinity and our penchant to lead in any situation that we're in.
Agreed. And something that you mentioned in there is everything circumstantial. I know men that are tremendous leaders who are stay-at-home dads and their wives go out and work. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that leadership isn't about the job. Leadership is about who's in your keep, right? And a lot of these men too, when their wives come home, their wives want to relax and want that leader to step in. Right? So the circumstances, once again, it doesn't matter. A man and a woman can be leaders in different ways at different times. And, it hands the baton back and forth in a marriage. My wife leads all day long with these children when I'm at work.
Yep.
And when I come home, she wants to relax a little bit and I take over.
Absolutely.
But she also is leading right now with the kids upstairs and I'm down here talking to you. So yeah, all I know is that I want to teach men how to lead because I believe it's biblical. I also believe that it strengthens a marriage and it definitely strengthens children as well as everybody else that you come into contact with.
Fair enough. I think your family and your circumstances is your proof point, So if people saw your house in disarray, saw, your wife not respecting you, it'd be hard to buy your product. But when they see amazing children and a peaceful household and this division of power that is balanced, because yes, even women are leaders in the household. They know the kids' blood types. We don't, there's so many things that they excel at that we can also learn from them, like empathy and emotional intelligence. But the proof point is in your family and in the success of your family. And I like that you live authentically that way. And it's not, this salesmanship of here's how to lead, but my house is in disarray. There's a lot of that going around, especially with the internet, that I really don't subscribe to.
Yeah. And let's be honest, my house is in disarray a lot because my kids are wired like me.
Physical disarray, not emotional disarray. That's fair. That's a fair point. I have one dog and I'm hiding a lot from the audience right now. So I understand the struggle.
So Vincent, this has been an absolute pleasure, man. I can't say enough. I love the journey that you took. I loved getting to know your parents through you. I loved getting to know your entrepreneurial journey, your journey into leadership, and actually asking me some questions here at the tail end that got us into a different type of conversation. So I appreciate everything about you, man, and I hope to stay in touch. Greatest thing about this podcast is I've gained a lot of friends through it, and I hope you remain one of those.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you for having me on. And, if you're ever in the North Carolina area, I know your opinion of DC, let me know. And, we'll go on a hike and talk a little bit. Maybe I can learn something about being a father. That is a whole nother level of life that doesn't always have instructions.
Absolutely. It's interesting because none of it really does, right? And goes back to your mentorship comment. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and call that a wrap. Once again, I appreciate you, Vincent. Really thank you for coming on the cast today, and you have a blessed day.
Thank you, sir. You do the same.
See if I can turn this dang thing off here. Technology, right? Come on. Hit the stop button.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.